Every family dog has a story. But what if that story began thousands of years before he ever met you? What if the howl of a wild wolf wasn't a threat, but a call? Home. The story of Leo the Labrador begins not with a friendly bark, but with the chilling snap of a hidden steel trap, and a choice that would awaken a secret buried deep in his blood. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine the Whispering Pines Valley in Colorado, a place so vast and quiet, you can hear the sound of your own heartbeat. Nestled deep within it is a single log cabin, a tiny bastion of warmth against a wilderness that is both majestic and unforgiving. This is home to 10-year-old Lily, a girl with eyes the color of the summer sky, and her grandfather Arthur, a retired forest ranger whose face is a roadmap of a life lived under the open sky. And then there was Leo. Leo was a yellow Labrador well into his golden years, his muzzle dusted with gray, his movements a little stiffer than they used to be. But don't let that fool you. In his deep brown eyes lived the soul of a protector, an unwavering loyalty that was the bedrock of Lily's world. This wasn't just a girl and her dog. This was a bond forged in shared secrets and absolute trust. A trust that had been tested. Just last winter, Lily, chasing a rabbit, had run out onto the frozen surface of the creek. Leo, sensing the subtle groan of the ice beneath her feet, had acted without hesitation. He didn't bark. He lunged, grabbing the back of her coat and pulling her back to solid ground a mere second before the ice gave way with a sickening crack. He was her hero long before our story even truly begins. Loyalty like that, you see, isn't about obedience. It's a language of the heart, a silent promise to stand between the one you love and the darkness. But the darkness was coming. It began on a crisp autumn afternoon. During a walk, just as Lily was about to scramble up a pile of mossy rocks, Leo suddenly stopped. His entire body went rigid, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. He pulled on her sleeve, dragging her back with a strange urgency. And in that exact moment, a sharp metallic snap echoed through the quiet woods. There, half hidden under the fallen leaves, was a bear trap. Rusted, illegal, and deadly. It had slammed shut on nothing but air, right where she would have placed her foot. Can you imagine? One wrong step, and their perfect day would have ended in tragedy. It's a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with a roar. Sometimes it just lies in wait, silent and patient under a blanket of leaves. They saw no one, but they both felt it, a cold, unseen presence watching from the trees. The next day, Arthur had to make a supply run to the nearby town of Solitude Creek. Before he left, he pointed towards an old rusted pickup truck parked near a trail entrance miles away. "That's Silas's truck," he'd muttered, his voice tight. "He's not welcome in this valley anymore." He didn't say more, but the warning hung heavy in the air. And then the world turned white. A blizzard, sudden and ferocious, descended upon the valley, swallowing the mountains and cutting the cabin off from the world. Hours turned into a day, and Arthur did not return. The crackling fire was their only comfort against the howling wind that clawed at the walls of their little home. That night, as Lily drifted in a restless, feverish sleep, it happened. A new sound joined the storm's symphony, a long, mournful howl that rose from the depths of the forest. It was a sound of profound loneliness and ancient power. Lily shivered in her sleep, but Leo was captivated. He stood at the large cabin window, his body perfectly still, his ears twitching. And then he saw it. Through the swirling vortex of snow, a shadow detached itself from the trees. A massive wolf, its fur the color of silver moonlight, stepped into the clearing. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't snarl. It simply stood there, watching the cabin with an unnerving intelligence. Its eyes, 2 points of amber light in the darkness, seemed to look right through the walls, right into Leo's very soul. Instead of barking, Leo let out a soft, questioning whine. This wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a greeting. It was a question he couldn't form an answer he desperately needed. What was this creature? What did it want? It felt less like a threat and more like a memory. A forgotten song his soul recognized, but his mind had long since forgotten. The silver wolf held his gaze for a long moment, a silent dialogue passing between two worlds. Then, as silently as it appeared, it turned and melted back into the storm. Inside, the fire crackled, the wind howled, and Lily's fever began to climb. Her protector Arthur was lost somewhere in the blizzard. A known danger, the hunter Silas, was lurking somewhere in the woods. And now an unknown power, an ancient and intelligent force of nature, was watching them from the darkness. Leo looked at the sleeping girl, who was his entire world, then back at the empty, snow-swept clearing where the wolf had stood. He was caught between two duties, his promise to the human world and a call from a wild world he was never meant to know. And as Lily's breathing grew more shallow, Leo knew a choice had to be made. But how can you protect the one you love when the threats are coming from every direction, both from the world you know and the one you don't? How do you protect the one you love when the threats are coming from every direction? When the danger wears the face of a man and the wilderness itself holds a secret you can't understand? For Leo, the answer was simple. You don't run. You stand your ground. You become the wall between your world and the storm. Inside the cabin, the air grew thick with sickness. Lily tossed and turned, her forehead burning with a fever that stole the light from her eyes. Each shallow breath she took was a small stab in Leo's heart. He lay by her bed, a steadfast guardian, his chin resting on the mattress, nudging her with his wet nose whenever she cried out in her delirium. He was her anchor in a sea of fever dreams. Then, for a brief moment, the world outside held its breath. The raging blizzard subsided into an eerie calm, the wind's howl softening to a whisper. But this was no reprieve. For Leo, it was an opportunity. Something was out there. A scent on the wind, faint and desperate, a thread of wrongness in the otherwise perfect snow. It was a call for help that only he could hear. Leaving Lily's side for even a moment felt like a betrayal. But ignoring the call felt like a different kind of failure. He slipped out into the biting cold, a world of blue shadows and blinding white. His paws sank into the deep powder as he followed the scent, past the familiar trees, deeper into a part of the forest Arthur had always warned was the territory of the wolf pack. And that's when he found it. There, caught in the brutal jaws of a steel snare trap, was a wolf cub. It was small, its fur the color of ash, its leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The snow around it stained a sickening crimson. It didn't snarl or fight. It just lay there, whimpering its body, trembling uncontrollably from pain and cold. And Leo froze. Now put yourself in Leo's paws for a moment. Every instinct passed down through 1,000 generations of his wild ancestors screamed at him. This was a rival, an enemy, the cub of the very creatures whose howls haunted the night. The law of the wild was simple and cruel: the weak perish, and you do not interfere. Leaving it there was the safe thing to do, the logical thing to do. But then Leo looked into the cub's terrified eyes, and he didn't see a rival. He saw Lily the day she fell from the tree. He saw a child alone, hurt and afraid. And a lifetime of loyalty, of love, of sleeping at the foot of a little girl's bed rose up and silenced the ancient savage voices in his blood. This is the essence of a hero, isn't it? Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. To endure pain for the sake of another. At that moment, Leo wasn't just a pet. He was a protector. He went to work. The trap was a wicked piece of engineering, cold and unyielding. He nudged and pushed at the release mechanism with his nose, but it wouldn't budge. He began to bite at the frozen steel, pulling with all his strength. A sharp edge sliced into his gum, and the warm metallic taste of his own blood filled his mouth. He ignored the pain, pulling and twisting, his entire body shaking with effort. And just as he felt the mechanism begin to give, he heard it. Snap. The sound of a dry twig breaking under a heavy boot. Someone was coming. His heart hammered against his ribs. It was a race against the devil himself. With a final desperate wrench, the jaws of the trap sprang open. The cub, free but injured, scrambled to its feet, but there was no time to escape. For there on the ridge above them, a figure had appeared. It wasn't the man. It was the silver wolf, the alpha female. She was magnificent and terrifying, her presence silencing the entire forest. She looked down her amber eyes, taking in the scene, her injured cub, the blood in the snow, and the domestic dog standing over it, his own mouth bleeding. This was it, the moment of judgment. But the attack Leo expected never came. The alpha didn't snarl, didn't lower her head to charge. She simply watched. Her gaze wasn't one of hatred, but of a piercing, profound understanding. It was a look that passed between two parents, two protectors. In that silent, frozen moment, a pact was forged. A debt was incurred. Mercy is a language that transcends species, and in that quiet clearing, it had been spoken, and it had been understood. The alpha gave a soft chuff, and the cub limped towards her, disappearing into the safety of the pines. A few minutes later, Silas arrived at the scene, but all he found was an empty sprung trap. He knelt, his eyes scanning the snow, and a low, vicious snarl curled his lip. He saw the evidence clearly, but he read the story all wrong. He saw the small tracks of the wolf cub. He saw the deep paw prints of a large dog. He saw the blood. But what he saw was not a rescue. He saw a partnership. In his twisted, grief-stricken mind, this was the ultimate betrayal. A domestic dog, a creature of man working with the very beasts that had ruined his life. This dog wasn't just a nuisance, it was a traitor, a monster. And at that moment, Leo went from being an obstacle to being the sole target of Silas's burning hatred. Leo, unaware of the new deadly enemy he had just made, trotted back to the cabin. He was exhausted, his mouth was throbbing, but he had won. He had answered the call of compassion. He slipped back inside, nudging the door shut, and returned to his post at Lily's bedside, a silent, bleeding guardian. He had forged a powerful secret alliance in the heart of the wilderness, but in doing so, he had painted a target on his own back, turning a disgruntled hunter into a relentless executioner. And that executioner was now convinced that the dog was the key to his revenge, and he would stop at nothing to claim it. Chak Chan Roy. De la Fan 3 của The Echo of the Pines. Tiếp nối câu chuyện với sự kích tin và căng thẳng leo thang dần, dắt chúng ta đến bầu vực của cao trào. Intro music begins with a low, rhythmic, heartbeat-like drum, creating a sense of impending action, then fades. An alliance forged in blood is a powerful thing, but a hatred born from grief is a relentless fire. Leo, the bleeding guardian, had returned to his post, but there was no peace to be found in the quiet cabin. He had won the battle for the wolf cub, but in doing so, he had invited the war right to his doorstep. Because the man in the woods, the hunter named Silas, now had a face for his demons, and it was the face of a loyal yellow Labrador. The uneasy quiet of the blizzard's aftermath was soon broken. A single sharp beam of light cut through the darkness outside, sweeping across the cabin walls like a prison searchlight. It sliced across the windows, momentarily illuminating the room in a cold, sterile white, before plunging it back into the flickering warmth of the fire. Silas was here. He was circling them, a shark in the snow. Leo stood like a statue, the fur on his back ridged with tension. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to bark, to issue a challenge to meet the threat head-on. But he looked over at the small figure of Lily, lost in the depths of her fever, so fragile that a single loud noise seemed enough to break her. And he understood a devastating truth. A fight here inside these thin wooden walls was a battle already lost. Even if he could somehow win against a man with a rifle, the fight itself, the violence, the terror would endanger Lily as much as the man himself. He couldn't protect the castle by fighting in the throne room. He had to draw the dragon out of the keep, and in that moment of desperate clarity, a plan formed in his brilliant mind. It was a terrible, desperate gambit, a choice that went against every fiber of his protective being. To save Lily, he would have to leave her. His eyes fell on a pair of Arthur's old leather work gloves lying on the hearth. They were saturated with the scent of his master, a scent of wood smoke, pine sap, and home. A scent Silas, the former ranger, would surely recognize. It was the perfect lure. He gently picked one up in his mouth, the worn leather, a familiar comfort in a world that had turned upside down. He took one last look at Lily, a silent promise passing between them. "I will come back." Then, coiling his aging muscles, he burst through the cabin's back door and into the freezing night, making sure to stay in the hunter's line of sight for just a second. A furious shout cut through the air. The gambit had worked. The hunt was on. He plunged into the forest, a golden blur against the snow. He wasn't just running, he was navigating. He knew this land every dip and rise, every game trail. He could hear Silas crashing through the undergrowth behind him, clumsy and loud, fueled by pure rage. A deafening crack exploded behind him, and the air next to his ear hissed. A bullet slammed into a pine tree, showering him with splinters of wood and ice. Fear, cold and sharp, spurred him on. He led the hunter on a punishing chase up a steep wooded ridge. At the top was a natural bridge, a massive fallen log that spanned a deep, shadowy ravine. It was slick with ice, a treacherous path. For Leo, it was nothing. He moved across it with a swift, confident grace. But for Silas, it was a different story. Halfway across, his boot slipped. He yelled, pinwheeling his arms as he fought for balance. For a glorious, heart-stopping second, it looked like the forest itself was about to swallow him whole. He managed to fall onto the log, his rifle clattering against the wood, his legs dangling over the abyss. You see, the wilderness has a way of testing a man's heart. And Silas's corrupted by hatred was found wanting. He didn't see it as a warning. He saw it as an insult. He pulled himself up, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury, and his rage burned hotter than ever. Back in the cabin, the gunshot had echoed faintly, pulling Lily from her fevered dreams. She was weak, her body aching, but the sound had jolted her with adrenaline. She saw the shadows moving outside. She saw Leo was gone. She was terrified, but she was her grandfather's granddaughter, a fighter. Her eyes fell upon the small, wind-up music box on her nightstand. It was a desperate, brilliant thought. A tiny song of hope against a symphony of darkness. With trembling hands, she cracked open a small back window and set the music box on the sill. A faint, tinny melody, a lullaby from a forgotten time, drifted out into the opposite direction of the chase. For a moment, the sound confused Silas, who had just recovered his footing. He paused, scanning the trees, distracted. It was only for a few seconds. But in a hunt like this, seconds can be a lifetime. Leo used that lifetime to push his burning muscles to their limit. But the chase, the cold and the constant fear were taking their toll. He was no longer a young dog. His breaths came in ragged, painful gasps. He made a wrong turn, a desperate scramble down a path that he thought was a shortcut. It wasn't. The path ended abruptly at the edge of a sheer cliff face, dropping into a box canyon. It was a dead end. He was trapped. He turned his back to the rock wall to face his pursuer. Silas appeared at the entrance to the canyon, his breathing heavy, a triumphant, cruel smirk on his face. He slowly raised his rifle, the black metal seeming to absorb all the light in the world. "Nowhere left to run, you traitor," he hissed. Leo didn't cower. He stood his ground, his body exhausted, but his spirit unbroken, ready to face the end. The world narrowed to the dark round hole at the end of the rifle barrel. Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. A slow, deliberate click echoed in the silent canyon as he switched off the safety. The world can shrink to a single terrifying point. For Leo, that point was the dark round muzzle of a rifle. The canyon was silent. The air was still. And the only sound was the slow, deliberate click of the rifle's safety being disengaged. This was the end of the line. He had run his race, played his gambit, and it had led him here. He braced himself not in fear, but in a final, defiant act of love for the girl he had left behind. Silas smirked, his finger tightening on the trigger. And then from the shadows of the canyon walls came a sound. It was not the howl of the wind. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate in the very rock around them. Silas froze. His head snapped to the side. A pair of luminous amber eyes had ignited in the darkness. Then another pair. And another. From the dense pines lining the canyon rim they emerged. The silver alpha female, followed by her entire pack. They moved with a chilling liquid silence, their paws making no sound on the snow. They were ghosts made of muscle and fur. Silas let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. "Come on then," he spat momentarily, shifting his aim towards the wolves. "Get it all over with at once." He expected an attack. a frenzy of teeth and claws, a savage end to his hunt. But the attack never came. The wolves did not rush him. They simply converged. In a display of breathtaking strategy, they fanned out, forming a silent living wall between Silas and Leo. They didn't snarl. They didn't lunge. They just stood there, their collective gaze fixed on the hunter, their presence an overwhelming weight of judgment. And this is where the story turns. This is the moment that would become a legend in the Whispering Pines Valley. The great silver alpha took one slow, deliberate step forward. Silas flinched, raising his rifle, but she ignored the weapon. She lowered her head and nudged her cub forward, the very cub Leo had saved. And under the cold moonlight, she revealed the faint-healed scar on its leg. My God, what a moment! No snarls, no claws. Just a silent, powerful accusation that cut Silas deeper than any tooth ever could. It was not an act of aggression. It was an act of justice. The wilderness itself was holding up a mirror to his soul, and the reflection was monstrous. You did this to a child, the gesture said, and the one you are trying to kill. He fixed it. Silas stared, his rifle wavering, his entire worldview crumbling around him. These were not the mindless monsters of his memory. They were intelligent. They remembered. They understood debt. And they had come to pay it. It was into this impossibly tense standoff that a new sound roared into the canyon. The angry buzz of a snowmobile engine. A bright headlight cut through the darkness, pinning all of them in its beam. The machine slid to a halt at the canyon's entrance, and two figures dismounted. The local sheriff and Arthur. Arthur took in the scene with the trained eye of a lifelong ranger. He saw the cornered, exhausted state of his loyal dog. He saw the illegal traps strapped to Silas's snowmobile. He saw the pack of wolves not as a threat, but as a silent jury. And he saw the rifle in Silas's trembling hands. Silas! Arthur's voice was calm, but it cracked through the canyon like a whip. Put the rifle down! Stay out of this, Arthur! Silas screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. They're monsters! This dog! It's working with them! It's unnatural! Arthur took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving Silas. You want to talk about what's unnatural, Silas? For years you've poisoned this valley with your hatred with these cruel traps. You call them monsters, but I've never seen a wolf act with anything but honesty. Tonight I see one standing in silent judgment of your cruelty. And as for the dog, he looked at Leo, and his voice softened with a pride that was absolute. That dog is showing more courage and compassion than you've shown in your entire life. He's not the monster here, Silas. He never was. The sheriff raised his own weapon. It's over, Silas. We found your truck. We found your illegal snares. And right now, I'm witnessing you aiming a firearm at a man's dog. Drop it. Now. Trapped between the law of man and the justice of the wild, something inside Silas finally broke. The hatred that had fueled him for years sputtered and died, leaving only a hollow, pathetic man shivering in the cold. The rifle slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the snow. The moment the weapon fell, the tension shattered. The great silver wolf dipped her head once, a final silent acknowledgement to Leo. Then, as quietly as they had come, she and her pack turned and vanished back into the pines, their duty done. The sheriff moved in to apprehend Silas, but Leo only had eyes for one person. He limped forward, every muscle in his body, screaming in protest, and collapsed at Arthur's feet, pressing his head against his master's leg. Arthur knelt in the snow, wrapping his arms around his dog's neck, burying his face in Leo's thick golden fur. The brave heart he felt beating against his chest was the sound of home. The hero had returned. As they prepared to leave the canyon, a strange quiet fell over the group. The hunter was captured. The heroes were safe. But as the snow began to fall once more, softly covering the tracks of the chase, everyone knew that this was not just the end of a hunt. It was the beginning of something new. One night of terror, loyalty, and a miracle in a snow-filled canyon had passed. But the question remained. Could a single echo of compassion truly change the heart of an entire town? The journey back to the cabin was a quiet one. A strange procession under the moonlight. The stoic sheriff, the disgraced hunter, now a prisoner, the old ranger and the loyal dog who had faced down death. The immediate violent danger was over, but the events of the night lingered in the air, a silent, powerful energy that promised things would never be the same. Back in the warmth of the cabin, safety felt like a physical blanket. Arthur tended to Lily, whose fever had finally begun to break her sleep, now peaceful. And by the roaring fire, Leo lay resting his tired body, finally succumbing to a deep, profound exhaustion. He had stood against the storm, and he had won. His family was safe. But stories like this don't stay contained within cabin walls for long. In a small town like Solitude Creek, news travels on the winter wind. The sheriff's official report was one thing, a sterile account of poaching and endangerment. But the story Arthur told, that was something else entirely. It was a story that felt more like a myth, a tale of a loyal dog's impossible gambit and a pack of wild wolves who understood the meaning of justice. It became a legend whispered over coffee cups and crackling phone lines. The story of Leo and the Silver Wolf. And it forced the people of the valley to a crossroads. The town hall meeting was packed. The air was thick with fear, skepticism, and a glimmer of awe. Ranchers spoke of livestock, of fear for their children, their voices echoing the ghost of Silas's arguments. They saw the wolves as a menace to be eradicated. Then Arthur stood up to speak. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't preach. He simply told the truth. For years, he began, his calm voice filling the room. We've seen this valley as a war between us and the wild. We've set traps, built fences, and carried rifles, convinced that the only way to be safe is to dominate. We saw the wolves as shadows, as monsters. But we were wrong. He paused, his gaze sweeping over his neighbors. Last night, my granddaughter was sick and alone. A man filled with a hatred we all allowed to fester tried to harm her. And who stood in his way? Not a fence, not a gun, a dog. My dog Leo, with a heart more courageous than any man I know. And when that wasn't enough, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. Who came to his aid? The very monsters we've been fighting. They didn't come to kill. They came to pay a debt. They came to deliver a justice that was cleaner and more profound than anything I've ever seen. They showed us that compassion is a language they understand. Maybe it's time we learn to speak it too. He sat down. A heavy silence filled the room. The story, in its raw, undeniable power, had done what no argument ever could. It had changed their hearts. And so they voted. Not to hunt, not to fear, but to try something new. They voted to establish the Valley Coexistence Initiative, funding smarter, non-lethal ways to protect livestock and creating protected corridors for the wildlife to thrive. They chose hope over hatred. Months later, spring had returned to the Whispering Pines Valley. The snow had melted, revealing a carpet of green, and the air was filled with the promise of new life. Lily, now fully recovered, sat on the porch steps, her arms wrapped around Leo's neck. Arthur watched them from the doorway, a peaceful smile on his face. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a sound drifted up from the distant tree line. A single clear howl. It wasn't menacing or lonely. It felt like a greeting, an acknowledgement. Leo lifted his head. His ears perked. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply looked towards the sound and let out a single soft woof in reply. Then he rested his head back on Lily's lap, content. The pact held. The two worlds remained separate, but they were no longer at war. They now shared an echo of respect. We often draw hard lines between what is tame and what is wild, forgetting that the heart of any living creature beats with the same fundamental desires for family, for safety, for a place to call home. A Labrador with his boundless courage taught an entire town that the strongest bridge between our two worlds isn't built with fences or guns, but with a single act of compassion. A lesson that continues to echo and will always echo through the pines of Whispering Valley. If this story of Leo's incredible loyalty touched your heart, please let us know in the comments below. We believe that stories are powerful. They can change minds, open hearts, and remind us of the profound connections we share with the animals in our lives and in the wild. Share your own story of a time an animal showed you unexpected courage or compassion. And if you want more stories that inspire, move, and stay with you long after they're over, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel to become part of our pack. Every subscription helps us continue to bring these meaningful stories to the world. Thank you for listening. And may you always hear the echo of compassion in the world around you.